The committee room was silent. That heavy kind of silence where every shuffle of paper, every cough, every click of a pen feels louder than it should. The cameras were rolling, the lights glaring down from above, and everyone knew this wasn't going to be a normal hearing. Jasmine Crockett sat at the long oak table, posture straight, eyes steady, every breath measured. In front of her, a stack of papers, a tablet glowing softly, and a pen she hadn't yet touched. She didn't need to. Her expression said enough, composed, alert, ready. Across from her sat Congressman Matt Gaetz, leaning back in his chair with that familiar half-smile. The one that says, "I'm in control." His suit crisp, his tie bold, his confidence almost theatrical. He thrived in chaos, and today, he thought he was about to own the room. But not this time. The tension between them wasn't born today. It had been simmering, a clash of principles, personalities, and public performance. Two politicians from opposite ends of the spectrum, both sharp, both unafraid to draw blood with words. And today, all of that unspoken energy was about to erupt. The audience, staffers, reporters, and curious onlookers, sat poised like theater-goers before an act. Some leaned forward, phones ready to record. Others whispered, already sensing the storm forming beneath the calm. The chairperson's gavel struck once. "All rise. The committee will come to order." Crockett's eyes flicked to Gaetz, then back to her notes. No words exchanged. Just silence. The kind that hums with unspoken challenge. Because this wasn't just a policy discussion. This was about respect, about dignity, about who gets to speak and who gets silenced. And somewhere deep down, everyone in that room could feel it. Something bigger than politics was about to unfold. The hearing begins like any other. Procedural introductions, brief statements, the illusion of professionalism. But beneath the formality, there's a current, one that everyone feels but no one dares to name. Matt Gaetz leans forward, smirking slightly as the microphone light flickers red in front of him. His fingers tap against the desk, a rhythm of impatience disguised as charm. He clears his throat. "Madam Chair," he begins, tone dripping with confidence. "I'd like to address a few inconsistencies in my colleague's remarks." His voice carries the polished sharpness of someone who knows how to weaponize words. He's done this before, dozens of times, turning hearings into theaters and debates into performances. The goal isn't resolution, it's domination. He glances toward Jasmine Crockett. For a moment, the air between them feels electric. "You know," he continues, "it's one thing to have passion, Congresswoman Crockett. But passion doesn't substitute for professionalism. Maybe if we focused less on attitude and more on accuracy, this committee would actually get something done." There it is. The jab. Not just political, but personal. A few chuckles ripple through the room, faint but deliberate. The kind of reaction that fuels him. Gaetz straightens his tie, smiling as if he's already landed the final blow. But Crockett doesn't move. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't even blink. The camera captures the contrast perfectly. His animated confidence against her composed stillness. It's a visual duel of energy versus restraint, ego versus elegance. He leans in again. "Congresswoman, I understand emotions run high. But this is Congress, not a campaign rally. Maybe take a breath before you turn everything into a scene." The room stiffens. Even the chairperson looks uneasy. For a brief second, you can feel the shift. That collective inhale people take when they know something's about to break. Gaetz, satisfied, sits back, pretending to review his notes. But everyone knows that wasn't about policy. That was about power. He's trying to control the tempo. To paint Crockett as impulsive, irrational, the stereotype too many women in power are forced to fight against. And he does it effortlessly, because that's his tactic. He doesn't just debate, he provokes. He pushes until his opponent slips, until emotion takes over. Then, when they react, he wins by calling it unprofessional. But this time, his read is off, because Jasmine Crockett isn't taking the bait. The camera pans to her. Steady hands, calm posture, lips pressed in measured silence. She knows what he's doing. She's seen it before, and instead of rising to it, She lets him build his tower of arrogance just a little higher. The audience, both in the room and the millions soon to be watching online, can sense it too. The tension isn't about what's being said, but what's about to be said. The gavel taps lightly, a warning. Mr. Gaetz, let's keep our comments directed toward policy. He smirks again, that signature grin of defiance. Of course, Madam Chair. I'm simply reminding the Congresswoman that passion without precision isn't leadership. It's theater. And there it is. The line that crosses the line. A few murmurs. A low exhale from the audience. Even his own colleagues exchange uneasy glances, because everyone knows he's gone too far. In this moment, the room belongs entirely to Jasmine Crockett. Not because she's spoken, but because she hasn't. Her silence is louder than his words, her stillness, heavier than his arrogance. The world's cameras are rolling, and every viewer will soon witness the shift, the calm before the reckoning. For a few seconds after Gaetz finishes, the room feels weightless, like all the oxygen has been quietly pulled away. Every camera in the chamber holds steady, waiting for her to speak. Reporters' fingers hover above their keyboards. Even the gavel pauses midair, suspended in uncertainty. But Jasmine Crockett doesn't move. She just sits there, eyes locked on the man across from her. Not angry, not shaken, just present. That silence becomes its own language. In politics, silence can be dangerous. It invites interpretation, misjudgment, projection. But Crockett knows something Gaetz doesn't. Silence can also be the sharpest weapon in the room. Her stillness unsettles him. He shifts in his chair, pretending to read through his notes again. But his confidence flickers for the first time. He looks up, waiting for the explosion he thought he'd triggered. It doesn't come. The silence stretches. 5 seconds, 10, 15. A cough echoes from the back. The lights hum softly overhead. Every heartbeat feels like a drum roll. Crockett's right hand rests calmly on her notepad. Her thumb taps once, barely audible. Her left hand adjusts a page. Not because she needs to, but because control lives in the details. Inside her mind, she's not reacting. She's reframing. She's replaying every word he just said, stripping away the noise, isolating the intent. He wanted to make her lose composure. He wanted a soundbite. He wanted to paint her as too emotional. She almost smiles. Because that's the playbook she's memorized, the one women in politics have faced for generations. When a man raises his voice, he's assertive. When a woman does, she's angry. When a man interrupts, he's commanding. When a woman defends herself, she's disruptive. She's seen it 100 times, and every time she's learned to make it work for her. The chairperson leans forward slightly, sensing the tension. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? No rush. She lifts her gaze, her expression still unreadable. Then, slowly, she exhales. There's something cinematic about that breath, the kind that feels like the turning of a page before the climax begins. The cameras zoom closer now. Her face fills the frame, calm, centered, deliberate. Every viewer watching from home can feel it. Something powerful is about to happen. Because Crockett isn't just preparing a rebuttal. She's preparing a moment that will live beyond this room, beyond this hearing, beyond politics itself. She glances briefly toward the spectators seated in the gallery. Some hold their breath, others grip their phones tighter. They know this silence isn't hesitation, it's momentum. Inside her, the words are aligning like dominoes, each one ready to fall in perfect rhythm. And Gaetz? He doesn't realize he's already lost control of the narrative. He smirks again, trying to reclaim it. Cat got your tongue, Congresswoman? The words hang there, petty, desperate, almost childish. And that's when it happens. The room reacts, not with laughter, but with discomfort. Even his own party members shift awkwardly. The arrogance feels misplaced now, out of tune with the atmosphere. Because in that moment, Crockett's silence doesn't look like defeat. It looks like authority. She doesn't need to raise her voice to make the room listen. They already are. Every inch of her stillness carries intent. Every second of that pause says, I know what I'm about to say will end this. Narration fades in, low, cinematic, steady. In that pause, she wasn't silent. She was sharpening her truth. Every heartbeat, every breath, every second of quiet was a countdown. And when she finally spoke, it wouldn't be noise. It would be impact. A reporter later described the moment perfectly. It felt like the silence before lightning. You could sense the strike before it even hit. And that's exactly what it was. A gathering of energy. A quiet reckoning. The camera pans again. Gaetz looks restless now, crossing his arms, leaning back with visible irritation. His power is slipping. He knows it. But Crockett doesn't move faster to meet him. She takes her time. A masterclass in control. Because control isn't about speaking first. It's about speaking last, and leaving no room for a comeback. The sound of a faint whisper travels across the table. Another representative murmurs, "She's about to cook him. They're right." Because this is no longer a political exchange. It's a psychological one. A duel of patience versus provocation. And only one of them knows how to win without swinging first. As the seconds pass, Crockett finally leans slightly forward. The faint scrape of her microphone adjusting echoes through the chamber. That's the cue. The silence breaks. But not with noise. With precision. Her lips part. Her voice steady. With all due respect. And just like that, the world leans in. The room is utterly still. Jasmine Crockett adjusts her mic. One small, deliberate motion that sends a ripple of anticipation through the chamber. With all due respect. Her voice cuts through the air. Even, low, measured. The kind of tone that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. Matt Gaetz leans back again, arms crossed, smirk returning. He's expecting the usual, a defensive rant, an emotional counterattack he can mock and twist. But what comes next isn't emotional, it's surgical. "You mentioned professionalism, Mr. Gaetz," she begins, her tone steady. "And I find it interesting that someone who's made a career out of turning these hearings into performances would dare to question mine." There's a small stir, a few quiet oohs from the audience that quickly fade under the tension. Crockett doesn't pause for applause. She doesn't need validation. She's focused. "You say I'm passionate. You say I'm emotional. And maybe you're right. I am passionate, because I actually care about the people who sent me here. I care about truth. I care about decency. But what I won't do is confuse arrogance with authority, or mockery with intellect. You call this theater? Maybe that's because you've forgotten what real work looks like." Her voice grows firmer, her words sharpened by truth, not anger. Gaetz's grin fades slightly. His eyes shift, darting briefly toward the cameras. A silent check to see if this is playing well on screen. It isn't. "I've watched you interrupt, belittle, and grandstand through this committee as if your presence alone is proof of competence. But leadership isn't volume, it's value, it's accountability. And if holding you accountable makes me the loud one in the room, then I'll gladly be loud." That line lands like a hammer. One of the reporters typing at the back stops mid-sentence. The camera zooms closer. Even the chairperson looks impressed. Jasmine doesn't break eye contact. Every word is delivered like she's marking time, precise, paced, perfectly balanced between grace and grit. Let's be clear. I don't raise my voice because I'm angry. I raise it because too often people like me aren't heard unless we do. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. The silence afterward is louder than any applause could be. Even the walls of the room seem to hold still. She continues. No tremor, no hesitation. I came here to legislate, not to entertain. I came here to debate, not to demean. You say you want professionalism? Then perhaps start by practicing it. A soft murmur ripples through the spectators. A few heads turn toward Gaetz, his jaw tight, his smirk gone completely. Jasmine doesn't let up, but she doesn't gloat either. She's not here to humiliate him. She's here to expose the truth. The problem, Mr. Gaetz, isn't that my tone is strong. It's that my tone is female and direct and unapologetic. And for some people, that's still too much to handle. That line hits like lightning. A few members exchange glances, the kind of look that says, she just said what everyone's been thinking. Crockett leans forward slightly, her voice softening. Not in weakness, but in focus. You don't get to tell me how to speak truth. You don't get to define my composure, my professionalism, or my place in this room. You may not like my delivery, but that doesn't make it less true. There's no shouting, no raised hand, no loss of control, just pure conviction, the kind that slices through arrogance like glass. Gaetz finally opens his mouth to interrupt, but the chair cuts in, gavel striking once. Let her finish. The audience erupts in quiet satisfaction, a collective breath of justice finally exhaled. Jasmine nods once, calm and resolute. You talk about passion as if it's a flaw. But passion is what drives every person who refuses to sit silent while others perform. Passion built this democracy. Passion keeps it alive. And if my passion makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that's because it exposes something you'd rather not see. The difference between serving people and serving yourself. Gaetz sits still now, eyes unfocused, face hardening in frustration. The camera lingers on him for a moment. The image of a man realizing he's lost control of the stage he built for himself. Jasmine closes her binder with quiet precision. The click of the clasp echoes like punctuation. Then she looks straight, ahead, not at Gaetz, not at the cameras, but at the truth itself. Empathy doesn't mean silence, and peace doesn't come from pretending everything's fine. Some of us were elected to challenge comfort, not to protect it. And just like that, it's over. No shouting, no chaos. Just a room full of people, trying to process what they just witnessed. A verbal dismantling that was as graceful as it was unflinching. The echo of Jasmine Crockett's last words still lingers in the room. For a few seconds, nobody moves. Nobody dares to speak. It's the sound of realization, that quiet, piercing stillness, when truth lands so hard it changes the atmosphere. Matt Gaetz sits frozen, his posture stiff. For once, his smirk is gone. His fingers, which usually tap the desk in impatience, stay perfectly still. He looks like someone trying to figure out what just happened and how to recover. The chairperson clears their throat, breaking the tension. Mr. Gaetz, you have the floor if you wish to respond. And just like that, the arrogance returns, forced, defensive, desperate to reclaim dominance. He leans forward, voice tight, but loud enough to fill the room. Well, that was quite the performance, Congresswoman. I have to say, your passion is impressive. But passion doesn't rewrite facts. And it certainly doesn't excuse a lack of respect for this institution. He glances around the room, looking for support, for nods, for any sign that the audience is still his. But the faces staring back at him aren't entertained. They're studying him. Crockett doesn't interrupt. She lets him speak, and that unnerves him even more. Let's be honest here, Gaetz continues, tone rising. This committee isn't a talk show, and your speeches might work on social media. But some of us are here to govern, not to go viral. There it is, the pivot from defense to attack. But the words sound hollow now, stripped of their usual charm. Crockett tilts her head slightly. A small, almost imperceptible movement that says, "Is that all you've got?" He presses on, trying to rebuild his rhythm. You can talk about tone, and passion and identity all you want. But at the end of the day, results matter. Maybe instead of lecturing everyone here, you could... Results like what, exactly? Her voice cuts clean through his sentence, sharp but calm, like a blade through glass. The room freezes again. Gaetz blinks, thrown off by the interruption. For a man who thrives on control, losing it mid-sentence is his worst nightmare. Crockett leans in slightly, hands clasped on the table. Results like performative hearings designed to trend instead of serve. Results like grandstanding while real issues go ignored? Please enlighten us. What's your version of results, Congressman? He tries to respond, but she keeps going, her tone measured, her words landing with rhythm and precision. Because from where I'm sitting, you've built a brand, not a legacy. You've turned this chamber into a stage and the people's trust into applause lines. And that's not leadership. That's theater. Gasps. A ripple of whispers. Even a few subtle nods from across the aisle. Gaetz's jaw tightens. He's losing the room. He tries to regain ground. His tone now defensive, his voice louder. You don't know anything about me, Congresswoman. You can't question my dedication. She interrupts softly but firmly. I don't have to question it. It speaks for itself. The air thickens. Crockett's expression remains calm, almost empathetic. But her words cut with surgical accuracy. The truth is, Mr. Gaetz, people don't remember your votes, your policies, or your results. They remember your moments, because that's what you sell. Outrage in exchange for relevance. The audience stirs again. Someone at the back murmurs, "She's killing him." Crockett continues, not with anger, but conviction. You say I'm emotional? You're right, I am. Because emotion is what keeps us human. But you've mistaken apathy for intelligence. You've turned empathy into weakness. You call yourself bold. But boldness without conscience isn't courage. It's chaos. Every word feels like a verdict. Gaetz opens his mouth again, but the words falter. He's out of rhythm, out of arguments, out of composure. You think you can talk down to me? No, she interrupts softly, almost kindly. I'm speaking up, because for too long, people like you have spoken down and called it leadership. The audience murmurs louder now, half shock, half admiration. Crockett doesn't look around. Her focus never leaves him. You've made a career out of mocking others, out of shouting louder instead of speaking wiser. But here's the truth, Mr. Gaetz. Volume fades. Integrity doesn't. The tension breaks. Some in the crowd start clapping before the chair gavels them to silence. Gaetz's face reddens. His jaw flexes, his composure cracking. He mutters something under his breath. Something picked up faintly by the microphones. Crockett doesn't respond. She just waits, eyes unwavering. The silence hangs again, heavy and final. He shifts in his seat, stands abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. This is ridiculous, he mutters. Total waste of time. The cameras catch it perfectly, the moment his frustration boils over. Reporters scribble furiously, photographers snap frames in rapid fire. Crockett simply says without raising her voice, "Leaving doesn't end accountability, Congressman. It just confirms it." He stops for a fraction of a second at the door, her words landing like the final nail. Then he storms out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The chair strikes the gavel. Order, order, please. But the order is already restored, not through authority, but through presence. Crockett sits back in her chair, exhales softly, and closes her notes. No celebration, no smile, just quiet composure. Because for her, this was never about winning. It was about exposing truth, and the truth had just walked out of the room. The clip exploded across the internet within minutes. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Overnight, the confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Matt Gaetz transformed from a heated exchange in a congressional committee to a symbol of something much larger. Millions watched, shared, and debated what had just happened. For some, it was the perfect example of speaking truth to power. For others, it was an uncomfortable reminder that arrogance and privilege can crumble under the weight of authenticity. The video began to circulate on every platform. On TikTok, snippets of Jasmine's calm but piercing words were set to dramatic music, captions flashing, "Integrity doesn't fade." On X, the hashtag #CrockettVskits trended worldwide within hours. People dissected every gesture, every pause, every glance. Political commentators rushed to give their takes. Supporters called it a masterclass in composure, while critics accused her of grandstanding. But deep down, everyone knew what they had witnessed wasn't ordinary political theater. It was something that resonated with human instinct, the confrontation between truth and ego. In the early morning, as the city still slept, Jasmine sat in her office. The lights were low, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs faint against the silence. Her phone vibrated nonstop, hundreds of messages, emails, calls from journalists. Yet she wasn't scrolling through them. She was staring out the window, watching the sunrise stretch across the Capitol dome. There was a mix of peace and exhaustion in her eyes. She hadn't planned to make headlines. She had only intended to speak her mind, but now her words had wings. Meanwhile, Matt Gaetz sat in his own office, surrounded by aides frantically managing the fallout. The clip of him walking out had gone viral. Commentators called it the storm out heard around the world. Even his usual supporters seemed divided. Some defended him, saying he had been provoked. Others admitted that he'd lost control, that he'd met someone who refused to play by his rules. For the first time, his swagger looked shaken. He turned off his phone, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. He hated losing control, especially publicly. Every word she'd said replayed in his head like a relentless echo. You've built a brand, not a legacy. He wanted to shrug it off, but deep down, he knew there was truth in it. The kind of truth that doesn't disappear when the cameras stop rolling. Across the country, people gathered around TVs and phones, rewatching the clip. In cafes, classrooms, living rooms, and offices, conversations unfolded. Some cheered for her courage, others debated her tone. But one thing was undeniable. She had sparked a dialogue that stretched far beyond politics. It was about leadership, respect, and how far people are willing to go for attention versus purpose. News anchors replayed the exchange with dramatic commentary. Late-night hosts turned it into their opening jokes. Memes flooded the internet, some humorous, some profound. One particularly viral image showed Jasmine sitting calmly at the table, her eyes locked on Gaetz, with the caption, "Stay composed. Let the truth do the work." That phrase became a rallying cry for people tired of performative outrage and hungry for authenticity. Back in the committee hall, the next day's meeting began with an unusual stillness. Even those who had been silent witnesses the day before looked different. More alert, more cautious, more aware. The chairperson glanced at the empty seat where Gaetz had sat, and then at Jasmine, who arrived quietly, her notebook in hand. She greeted everyone politely, no arrogance, no smugness, just professionalism. It wasn't about basking in victory, it was about getting back to work. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed with new meaning. Every question, every statement carried the invisible weight of what had happened. For once there was restraint in the room. Theatrics had been replaced with thoughtfulness, at least for a moment. Later that evening, a journalist asked her outside the Capitol, "Congresswoman, what do you make of the reaction to your exchange with Congressman Gaetz?" She paused before answering, her tone calm but thoughtful. "I think people are just tired," she said. Tired of shouting, tired of division, tired of empty performances. Maybe this reminded them that accountability still matters. Maybe that's what they needed to see. The reporter pressed further. "Do you think you went too far?" She smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't have a volume setting. It just needs a moment." That quote became another viral headline. Truth doesn't have a volume setting. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Gaetz faced pressure from his colleagues. Some distanced themselves quietly. Others advised him to apologize or at least clarify. He refused. His pride wouldn't allow it. But even in his stubbornness, there was hesitation. A flicker of recognition that he'd been outmatched, not by aggression, but by grace. That night, Political pundits debated whether the incident marked a turning point in how congressional discourse would be remembered. But the truth was simpler. It showed what happens when authenticity meets arrogance. One stands firm, the other shatters. For Jasmine, the days that followed were a whirlwind: interviews, praise, criticism. But in private, she stayed grounded. Her team asked if she wanted to release a statement. She declined. "The clip says everything it needs to," she told them. "Let the people decide what it means." And they did. Artists turned the moment into murals. Students quoted her in essays. Activists shared her words in protests. What began as a heated argument had evolved into an emblem of integrity. Her calm demeanor, her refusal to shout, her command of truth, it had struck a nerve in a world oversaturated with noise. Somewhere in Florida, a young woman watched the clip for the 10th time. She was preparing for her law school interview and had been doubting whether her voice could ever matter in a room full of louder, older men. After watching Jasmine stand her ground, she smiled to herself. "Maybe it can," she whispered. Back in Washington, another hearing loomed. The same committee, the same room. But when Jasmine entered, the atmosphere was different. Respect filled the space, not just for her, but for the idea she had resurrected, that composure could be stronger than chaos. As the gavel fell once again, the echoes of the previous confrontation seemed to linger, not as tension, but as a reminder. The confrontation had ended, but its message had just begun its journey. Some called it political theater, others called it truth-telling. But for those who watched closely, it wasn't about politics at all. It was about humanity, the collision between ego and empathy, pride and purpose, noise and clarity. When history looks back on that day, the footage will play again. The calm, voice against the storm, the walkout that turned into a symbol, the silence that followed. And somewhere, far from the cameras and headlines, Jasmine Crockett will still be doing what she always does, showing up, speaking truth, and letting her integrity speak louder than any performance ever could. Because in the end, it wasn't just a 4-minute confrontation. It was a revelation that in a world addicted to shouting, silence, when filled with truth, can be deafening. The room was quiet again, eerily quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from reverence. The storm had passed, yet its echo still vibrated through every corner of the committee hall. Cameras were still rolling, though the hearing had ended. A few reporters whispered into their microphones, trying to capture reactions, but no one dared to speak too loudly. It felt as if the entire nation had collectively held its breath. Jasmine Crockett sat still in her chair. Her hands rested calmly on the table, fingers interlaced, her eyes steady. Across the room, the chairperson gave her a faint nod, one that said more than words ever could. A quiet acknowledgement of grace under fire. Behind her, aides shuffled papers, the faint clicks of pens and laptops filling the void left by Gaetz's earlier exit. But the noise now seemed distant, unimportant. What mattered had already been said. Outside, flashes erupted as journalists crowded near the committee doors, waiting for a statement. They wanted headlines, sound bites, reactions, maybe a little drama. But Jasmine wasn't in the mood for theater. She had lived it, dismantled it, and walked through it untouched. When she finally rose from her seat, she didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, graceful, and certain. A few of her colleagues stood instinctively, not out of protocol, but out of respect. Her composure was magnetic, like a gravity that pulled the room into stillness. She gathered her papers, took one last glance at the chair she'd occupied, and began walking toward the exit. Each step echoed across the polished floor, every footfall measured, carrying the weight of something greater than politics. By the time she reached the doorway, a murmur began, first quiet, then growing, until it became something powerful. Applause. Not thunderous, not chaotic, just steady, heartfelt clapping that carried the kind of sincerity you rarely see in that building. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended, questions firing all at once. "Congresswoman, what's your reaction to Congressman Gaetz leaving? Do you think this changes your relationship with your colleagues? What message do you want people to take from today?" She stopped, turned toward them, and smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for the cameras, but the quiet kind that says, "I've said all I needed to say." "Sometimes," she began softly, her voice carrying above the commotion, "the goal isn't to win an argument. It's to remind people that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard." For a moment, the crowd froze. Then, flashes went off again, brighter this time. That single line, delivered with calm certainty, would echo across headlines, podcasts, and primetime broadcasts for weeks. It would be replayed, reinterpreted, and remembered. Not because it was clever, but because it was honest. Later that evening, she appeared on a live news broadcast. The host introduced her with admiration, calling her the congresswoman who turned silence into strength. Jasmine didn't bask in the praise. She listened, nodded politely, and when asked if she felt vindicated, she said only, "This isn't about me. It's about how we hold each other accountable, even when it's uncomfortable." As she spoke, the screen split between her image and a replay of Gaetz's storm out. The contrast was undeniable. His anger, her calm, his outburst, her composure. The host tried to dig for more conflict, asking, "Would you call what happened a victory?" Jasmine shook her head. "No," she said simply. "There are no victories in division. There's only clarity. And clarity is what we got today." The clip went viral again. People began to quote her words like poetry. Educators used her exchange as an example of restraint and emotional intelligence. Even political opponents, though hesitant to admit it publicly, acknowledged her poise. Meanwhile, Gaetz's office released a brief statement insisting that his walkout was a principled decision. But the world had already moved on. His attempt to control the narrative couldn't compete with the authenticity of what had unfolded. His arrogance had collapsed under the weight of sincerity. Weeks passed, and the furor began to settle. But the impact remained. The confrontation had evolved into something symbolic, an emblem of what leadership could look like when integrity overpowered ego. Jasmine received letters from across the country. Teachers thanking her for showing students what strength looks like. Young women sharing stories of finding their voice in male-dominated spaces. Even veterans and pastors writing that her calm had reminded them of something sacred, dignity under pressure. But Jasmine didn't frame the letters or hang them in her office. She kept them in a drawer, quiet reminders of the moment when truth found its way through noise. One evening, long after the cameras had stopped following her, she walked through the empty halls of Congress. The building, usually so alive with motion and argument, was still. The marble floors reflected the dim light of the chandeliers. She paused outside the committee chamber, the same one where it had all unfolded. She stepped inside. The room was empty now, the air heavy with memory. She ran her fingers along the desk where she had spoken those words, her words, and exhaled slowly. For the first time, she allowed herself a smile. Not triumphant, but peaceful. She whispered to herself, "Truth doesn't whisper when it's finally free." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't for anyone else. It was her final reflection, her closing chapter. And somewhere in the stillness of that room, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Outside, the Capitol lights glowed against the night sky. Cars moved below, people hurried home, and the world kept turning. But something in the air had shifted, a small, imperceptible reminder that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly in the background, waiting for people to notice. History wouldn't remember every argument that day. It wouldn't remember every insult, every smirk, or every gavel strike. But it would remember the silence that followed, the kind of silence that transforms chaos into clarity. And as Jasmine Crockett walked down the steps of the Capitol, wind brushing through her hair, she didn't think about politics or polls. She thought about legacy. Not the kind built on headlines or viral clips, but the kind built on courage. The courage to stay calm when others lose control, to speak when silence feels safer, and to remind the world that truth, once spoken, never really dies, because the argument had ended. The cameras had turned off. The crowd had gone home, but the echo, her echo, was only just beginning.